primarily around the homelessness and the duties of the local authority with regards to homelessness, and the duties of the local authority with regards to the housing register. And many of you might know that's in Herefordshire. It's called Home Point. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so let's just clear these. Sorry, won't be a second. So the functions of the housing solutions team. So as I say, there are two main functions with regards to the housing solutions team. So and our role is all around advice and assistance and assessment. And they are the two main functions are, as I say, with regards to assessing and assisting homeless families, and that is under Part 7 of the Housing Act 1996, and the managing of the housing register and the assessing of applications to the housing register, commonly known as Home Point, and that is under Part 6 of the Housing Act 1996. So and a lot of what we do is contained within the Housing Act 1996, so and particularly those two parts. What we do is the law around housing assessment is devolved to the regional governments. So the Housing Act 1996 applies to just England. There are different laws for the devolved regions. So you can't apply what I'm talking about today to Scotland or to Wales or to Northern Ireland, though the laws are very, very similar. So within so the Part 7 of the Act, which is the homelessness, it is covers the whole of England. It's very prescriptive. There's a lot of detail in there. Part 6 of the Act, which is about the housing register, there's not as much detail in the legislation, and the idea is that each local authority will devise its own allocations policy, and Herefordshire has what's called its housing allocations policy, which the current version was updated in April of this year, and you should be able to find on the Home Point website. So I'm just going through these now. So how homelessness and the housing register is administered within the different authorities within England is different depending on the type of authority it is. Herefordshire is what's known as a unitary authority. So both the homelessness functions and the housing register sit with the county council. If you go over to, say, Gloucestershire or Worcestershire, they're on a district level. So those roles are carried out by the district councils rather than by the county council. So in Herefordshire, we cover the whole of the county rather than, say, just Hereford or Leominster or wherever. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So just to talk you through the makeup of the Housing Solutions team. The manager is a guy called Will Neville, and he then reports into the housing director, who is Hayley Crane. Now, Will has a number of teams underneath him. So you have the housing solutions officers, and it gets a bit confusing because we are called the housing solutions team, but then you have housing solutions officers whose primary job is to give advice and to assess homelessness applications and those threatened with homelessness. Then you've got the Home Point team, who will take and assess applications to the Home Point scheme and will administer the Home Point scheme. So that is the advertising of properties and the ensuring that the properties that are advertised, all the right details are from the providers, from the landlords, which are the housing associations, or what's known as RPs, so registered providers. And then we've got the temporary accommodation team. So they will arrange and provide temporary accommodation to all those families or households that we have a duty to accommodate and as homeless. And then we've got the outreach and rough sleeper team. So there's two parts to them. The rough sleeper team will be working with people who are rough sleeping, and I'll come on to that because not everybody will have a duty to provide accommodation when they're homeless. But also the outreach team have work with what's called the White Cross Hub, and that is supported accommodation for people who are who've been long-term homeless, long-term rough sleeping, and it's supported to then get them into independent living eventually. And then there's on top of that, then you've got the reviews and complaints, which I deal with. So then both under Part 7 of the Housing Act, there is a statutory duty to be able to then review any legal decisions that we make. And also there is I deal with the home point appeals, which is where somebody is unhappy with the decision that's been made in regards to the banding. Usually on home point, I will do the appeal on that. I also deal with councillors and MPs inquiries, complaints, ombudsman inquiries, and freedom of information requests. So I'm sure you're all aware, but just to stress that unlike many authorities, Herefordshire is not what's called a stock holding authority. So it doesn't actually hold its own housing stock. We don't, so there isn't such a thing as council housing in Herefordshire. So we're probably about 15 years ago now, we had a stock transfer of the existing council housing, which went over to a range of housing associations. So you may have heard, and there may be representatives here today from people like Connexus, Stonewater, Platform, and a whole range of other housing associations who are the managers of the stock, and those are the properties which are advertised through the Home Point scheme. Right, so just start off with the homelessness side of things. So under the 1996 Housing Act, every local authority in England is under a duty to provide free advice to anybody who believes that they are either threatened with homelessness or homeless. Okay. And that is to anybody who's within their district. So that would be anybody who's approaching from within Herefordshire for us. And part of this duty is to consider whether a homeless application should be accepted in law and approach. So anybody who comes to the council is considered to be making an application for assistance. That doesn't mean that the application will be accepted. And I will talk a little bit more about the 5 steps of homelessness and what we have to do when we're looking at a homeless application in a minute. So we've also got not just a legal duty to assess and see if we've got a legal duty to assist somebody, but also we've got help to advise them about what their different housing options are. And how we may be able to help them depending on their circumstances. So that might be referrals to supported housing providers, such as we talked about the White Cross Hub a few minutes ago, but also there's an organisation called CCP who've got 3 sites in Herefordshire, in Hereford. They're Pomona Place, Bridge House, and they've recently taken over the management of Hope Scott House as well in Hereford, which are all supported accommodation for people. We've got what's called the rent and bond scheme. So this is to help people get into private rented accommodation. So this is help with deposits, help with rent in advance, and things like that. And and also the homeless officers or the housing solutions officers would be looking at helping people apply to Home Point. It can be quite a lengthy process, and also working with charities, voluntary organisations to help set up tenancies, whether that's in the public sector, so in the social housing sector, or within the private sector. So things like, as I say, money to help with deposits, rent in advance, maybe help with getting white goods and different things that they need for housing. And then a the further part of our duty is where somebody may be believed that they are threatened with homelessness. It is negotiation where it's suitable to negotiation with a landlord, and it may be seeking to arrange assistance with paying off rent arrears or things like that. It may be quite often negotiation with parents or with friends and family who've asked somebody to leave the household. Could I have the next slide, please? Right. So at the very core of the homelessness law is what's called the 5 tests of homelessness. And if you're really interested, then if you want to go and look in Part 7 of the Housing Act, you'll see these all under different sections. So the first part of what we have to do is look to see whether somebody's eligible for public funds. So anybody who is homeless or threatened with homelessness, there's no immediate duty on the local authority to assist them. There is to give advice, but we have to see whether they are eligible for public funds. And this is to do with their immigration status in the UK. If they're not eligible for public funds, they're not eligible for assistance under either Part 6 or Part 7 of the Housing Act. So they can't go on Home Point, and they wouldn't be able to be assisted by the homelessness team. And they wouldn't be provided with temporary accommodation. So if somebody is eligible for public funds, then we can progress. If they're not eligible for public funds, it may be that they may be seeking asylum or something like that. So it would be referring them back to the Home Office to see if they can get into accommodation that way through the NAS team. It may be that they need assistance with approaching the embassy for their country to see if they can get a return back to their country of origin, all of those kind of things. So it's seeing if there are other organisations who may be able to assist. If somebody is eligible, then what we have to look at is whether they are actually homeless right now or whether they are threatened with homelessness. And this is all to do with the time period that the law states, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And if they meet those first 2 tests, then the third test is, are they in what's called priority need? Now, priority need is a legal term to mean, if they are homeless, are they vulnerable? Now, it's a test, a comparative test, and I'll come on to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then the 4th test we have to look at is what's called intentional homelessness. Now, what intentional homelessness is, has somebody's actions or their inactions, when they fail to do something that they know they should have done, directly led to homelessness. And if that is the case, then the local authority may not have a duty to assist them. And then finally, what we have to look at is, do they have a local connection to the local area? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Where they don't have a local connection, the law allows a case to be referred back to where they do have a local connection. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. So I've already talked a little bit here about eligibility, but if you want to refer back to this information, then it'll give you the main groups of who is eligible. So UK nationals who are habitually resident in the UK. And what habitually means is, do they normally live here, or have they recently returned to the UK and they can show that they are now settled and established in the UK? Okay, this came about quite a few years ago from people coming back to the UK to access services and then leaving. You have to be able to show that you would normally live here. Some Commonwealth countries have automatic status to reside in the UK. EU nationals who have since Brexit, they have to be registered on the settled status scheme with the Home Office, or if they are waiting, if they've applied and they're waiting, they have to show that they've got either a pre-settled status, so they're waiting for their assessment, or that they've got settled status. Without that, you don't have the automatic eligibility. And persons who have been granted refugee status, whether that's time limited or indefinite leave to remain or to enter the UK, will normally have eligibility. There may be some restrictions on their immigration status, but we would have to take those into account. And then the opposing of that are, you can see there that asylum seekers would not have eligibility, because they are under or the Home Office is under a duty to provide them with accommodation under the NAS scheme if they request it, or they make their own arrangements, but the local authority would not be accommodating. Some of you may be aware that there is an exception to that, but that would be where, say, unaccompanied children who are asylum seeking, the local authority would have a duty to accommodate them. But we're looking at adults here, and there wouldn't be no automatic duty to accommodate. Could I have the next slide, please? So when we're talking about homelessness or the threat of homelessness, so these are just a few examples for you to think about when we're looking at what does homelessness or a threat of homelessness mean. So it would be a loss of your legal right to occupy accommodation. So let's say you're in private accommodation, your landlord has issued you legal notice that they want to take possession of the accommodation. So some of you may have heard of something called Section 21 notice. That is, if you're in a private rented accommodation, that would normally be the route that a landlord would start possession proceedings, so to take possession. So if you've been issued with a Section 21 notice and it is valid, and we'd have to check all of that, but then you are deemed to be threatened with homelessness. Now, the legal definition of threatened with homelessness is that you are likely to become homeless within the next 56 days. Obviously, there is a bit more to it than that, but that would be the normal threatened with homelessness definition. If you are, say, you're renting a room in a house where your landlord, then and you're therefore a lodger, a landlord would have to give you reasonable notice because you're what's known in law as an excluded occupier. And this basically means that reasonable notice would be the period that you pay rent. So if you pay monthly rent, the landlord would have to give you 1 month's notice. Other examples would be things like family exclusions, where, let's say, quite often we'll have a parent asking a child, or an adult child normally, but to leave the accommodation. Or could be a relationship breakdown where one party is the tenant or the owner of the property. There are rules around this, around marital law if they're married, but we won't go into that now. But that would be another reason. If you, say, normally live on, say, a houseboat or a static caravan or something like that, and you don't have a pitch to place that, or you lose your pitch, then you would be deemed to be homeless because of that. Your property may be condemned due to disrepair, or maybe in such a poor state that it's unreasonable to reside there, and there's evidence of that. You could be fleeing domestic abuse, or fleeing violence, or serious harassment would be other grounds, or homelessness in an emergency due to a disaster. So we quite often have cases where the house fires. You remember we had the floods in Hereford a couple of years ago, where we had quite a lot of approaches due to properties that were flooded out, storms, things like that. Other reasons may be you're unable to access your home because of physical impediment. We do get quite a few cases where somebody's coming out of hospital, their property's on the first floor, and they're unable to get upstairs. Well, by the very dint of that, they are deemed to be homeless. So that would be another reason. Come on the next slide, please. Okay, so where somebody is threatened with homelessness, the law says that, so they're eligible and they are likely to become homeless in the next 56 days, the law says that a local authority would owe somebody what's called a prevention duty. Okay, so a prevention duty is a duty to help somebody to prevent themselves from becoming homeless. So this is all around work to do with talking about what their housing options are and supporting them to pursue those housing options. Now, the basis for a prevention duty is if the local authority agrees that somebody meets those first two tests I talked about, is that we do what's called a personal housing plan with them. So a personal housing plan is basically a synopsis of what the situation is and what their circumstances are and what housing options there are to help them prevent their homelessness. And the local authority is then under a duty to keep that under review with the person or the household who are threatened with homelessness, to assist them to pursue that and to try and stop them from becoming homeless. Okay. The prevention duty should run for only 56 days, okay, because the legal definition of being threatened with homelessness is 56 days. Now, in reality, that prevention duty may then be extended because of circumstances. Let's say a landlord says, well, I'll let you stay another 3 weeks after the notice runs out, or parents say, well, I want them out by the end of next month, or something like that. So we can extend it depending on the circumstances. Okay. Thank you. So if somebody, if the prevention duty comes to an end and the person actually becomes homeless, or they approach and they're actually homeless, then the laws and the person or the household meets those first two tests, then the law says that the local authority has what's called a relief duty towards the person or household, and that means that there's 56 days in which to try and resolve or relieve their homelessness, again using the personal housing plan as the basis to work with that person to try and relieve their homelessness. Okay, so a relief duty, as I've said here, is not a duty to accommodate a person, okay, or a household. It is a duty to try and relieve the homelessness. Okay, but we'll come on to that in a second. Have the next slide, please. So if somebody is homeless, or a household is homeless right now, and we accept the relief duty, we have to then decide whether we owe them a duty of temporary accommodation. Now, normally we will be asking, are they able to make their own arrangements whilst they're homeless? You know, they may be able to stay with family and friends. They may choose to do that. If they can't, then we have to consider whether we've got a duty to accommodate them. Now, this comes down to this, what I mentioned earlier, this theory of priority need. And priority need is where somebody is homeless and eligible, and are they deemed to be vulnerable as a homeless household? So if they're not deemed to be vulnerable as a homeless household, then there's no duty on the local authority to accommodate them. So where we're looking at automatic priority need categories. So if there is proof that a member of the household is pregnant, that's an automatic priority need. Where there is one or more children within the household, so up to the age of 18, that is an automatic priority need. Where the household is homeless due to a natural disaster such as fire, flood, storm, anything like that, there's an automatic priority need. Somebody who's fleeing domestic abuse, that is an automatic priority need as well. 16 and 17-year-olds not in the care of the local authority who are homeless, that is also a priority need. And 18 to 20-year-olds who have been in care and are but currently no longer in care and homeless, that is a priority need. Where there is where we have to assess the need for or the the circumstances to work out whether there is priority need. So physical and mental health conditions we have to look at, and have to determine whether the level of support that they are gaining, medication, all of those kind of things, the level on severity of those conditions, whether that makes somebody priority need. And that's looking at all of the medical evidence, maybe getting additional medical advice and then making a decision. A care leaver over the age of 21, we would have to consider whether they are at priority need or not. So that is between the ages of 21 and 25. That is, the test there is, are they vulnerable as a result of being in care? So what's happened to them whilst they were in care? Any physical, mental health conditions, anything like that, and that's taking a holistic view of their situation to work it out. Other things would be things like learning disabilities, frailty due to old age. Another big one that we have to look at is institutionalization. So let's say somebody's been in hospital for many months. Are they able to cope themselves when they come out of hospital? Things like, if somebody's been in prison for many years, we have to look at that. Somebody who's fleeing violence but not DA, we have to look at and consider whether that the severity is such to give them a priority need. And also there's one there for modern day slavery and human trafficking we have to look at. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So during the prevention and relief duty, the focus is on trying to help the person or the household resolve their situation, so prevent them from becoming homeless or relieve their homelessness. So that's where the main work is. But at the same time, the housing solutions officer will be looking at that if we get to a stage where we can't relieve the homelessness, is there a main duty towards the household? And I'll come on to talk about that in a second. And that is looking at all the 5 tests I've talked about and seeing whether they meet all of those 5, and then whether we have an ongoing duty to them. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So I've talked you through the first 3 tests. The 4th test, which is a minefield, is what's called intentional homelessness. Now, what we're looking at here is, has somebody's actions directly led to their homelessness, and was that a deliberate act? Things like could be things like antisocial behaviour, could be quite often it's things like antisocial behaviour, it could be damage to a property, all of those kind of things. Or is it an omission that they know they should have done and they failed to do? And the classic one here would be they had the money to pay their rent, they chose not to pay their rent. As a result, the landlord has sought possession of the property. Okay. And then what we have to also look at is what's called acting in good faith versus ignorance of the fact. So let's say somebody gave notice on a property, and they were moving to another property and that fell through. Well, were they acting, would they, giving notice on their first property is making themselves homeless, but were they acting in good faith because they had a property to go to? That would be an example of that you'd have to look at. Ignorance of a fact. Well, the law says that ignorance of the terms of your let's say your tenancy agreement, you should know what's in your tenancy agreement because you've signed it. So we'd have to look at whether they were ignorant of the fact and whether that is grounds upon which to say that that they're not intentionally homeless. Okay, so let's say that we do find somebody intentionally homeless. There is a duty then on the local authority to continue to provide somebody with temporary accommodation, because if somebody's intentionally homeless, we know that they're eligible, we know that they're homeless, and we know that they're in priority need. Okay, so we then would look at intentionality. So if we find them intentionally homeless, there is a duty on the local authority to provide that family with accommodation for a reasonable period. And a reasonable period in law is enough time for them to find alternative accommodation. Okay. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so the fifth and final test is what's called local connection. Okay, so and I should have mentioned this before, that we have to look at local connection when into the relief duty, because if there is somebody meets the first two tests, but they don't have any local connection, say to Herefordshire, let's say they've come from Birmingham, they want to move to Herefordshire, and they're presented here as homeless. There's and they're not fleeing domestic abuse, and they're not fleeing any other violence from the area that they've come from. Then there would be, if they've got no local connection to Herefordshire, then there would be grounds for us to say, yes, there's a relief duty, but we're referring it back to Birmingham for Birmingham to work with you to resolve your homelessness. If they're so I'm just losing myself a little bit. If we don't refer a case, but we come to the main duty, so they meet the first four tests, then we can accept what the main duty, but we can refer that main duty back to where their local authority is. Okay, so and that would then mean that the local authority would then have, let's say Birmingham would then have the duty to accommodate that household in temporary accommodation and work with them to end their homelessness. So what constitutes a local connection? So living in an area for 6 out of the last 12 months in accommodation of choice that is settled. Okay, so let's say you come from Birmingham and you're staying on your mate's floor for the last 6 months. That may not necessarily be accommodation of choice or settled. Okay, what we're looking at really is that you have the right to reside there. Let's say you've moved in with a friend and you're paying rent and you've been there 6 months or more, then yes, that will be settled accommodation. If you haven't been here for 6 out of the last 12 months, then let's say you've been away for the last 6 months, but you've been living in Herefordshire for 3 out of the last 5 years in settled accommodation, that will give you a local connection. If you're currently working in Herefordshire, and when I mean working, it's your actual place of employment, and where you go to work is in Herefordshire. So that would, and you'd only need 1 day of employment to actually be employed right now to be able to demonstrate that. There has to be meaningful employment, so that normally means that it's regular hours and over 16 hours a week, but there are quite a lot of detail around that. If you don't have any of that, have you got an active family connection with immediate family? So you've got immediate family, so that is, and it's restricted to your parents, your adult siblings, and adult children. No grandparents, no aunts and uncles. It has to be immediate family, and that they can show that they've lived here for at least the last 5 years, and there is an active connection you have with them ongoing. So they may be supporting you, different things like that. There are exemptions. So domestic abuse is an exemption with regards to the local connection, and exceptional circumstances can be considered. Also, a care leaver who, let's say, has made an application to Herefordshire, but they're let's say their local authority that they're in care with is, say, Gloucestershire, but they would not have to show local connection rules, and that's recently changed. It's different for Home Point, but for homelessness, it's recently changed. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So what is the main duty or a full duty? So this is what's, you might hear the term section 193 duty. So this is where a household meets all of the tests, and the local authority then says, yes, we will continue to accommodate you and assist you to find accommodation to end your homelessness. And that duty will remain until you are you've found accommodation, or you lose that duty because of your own actions. Okay. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so that's basically, I've tried to simplify it as much as possible. There's kind of like a roadmap there for you. It doesn't have everything in there, but it gives you an idea of the steps in the homelessness route. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about what temporary accommodation is. Okay, so there are two forms of temporary accommodation. So Section 188 of the Housing Act, oh, thank you. Section 188 of the Housing Act is temporary accommodation whilst investigations into your case are ongoing. Okay, so this is accommodation pending a decision. Now, the rules around that type of accommodation, it can't be challenged, or it can't be challenged within the review process. It can only be challenged by judicial review. Okay, if we accept a main duty and then we offer you temporary accommodation under Section 193, so that's the main duty, then that is deemed to be for a longer term. It's not pending a decision, and the suitability of that accommodation can be challenged under the review process. Now, just to talk to you a little bit about the practicalities of what temporary accommodation is. We're under a duty to provide suitable temporary accommodation to meet the household's needs. However, we have, I can't remember the exact figures at the moment, we have an awful lot of households made up of large families, individuals, and across the board in temporary accommodation at the moment. We have a fixed number of rented self-contained units, and they are rented through private landlords that we manage and rented through housing associations that they manage. They're all full, and we have long waiting lists for places in temporary accommodation units. So we have to use hotels and bed and breakfasts, and we do unfortunately have quite a few families in hotels and bed and breakfasts, and for a considerable long period of time as well, which I know you people are going to ask me is outside of the guidance of the law, but that is the reality of the situation in Herefordshire at the moment. It does mean at this moment in time that we are having to place people outside of the county where we can't secure bed and breakfast and hotel rooms in county. So we've got families and households all over the West Midlands at the moment. And what we try and do is bring them back into county as soon as possible. And we will try and offer self-contained accommodation as soon as we can. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So that's the homelessness side. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Home Point, so the housing register. So as I said, the part 7 of the Act, so the homeless part of the Housing Act, is quite prescriptive. There's a lot of detail in there. Part 6, there's not so much detail because it's up to the local authority to design and implement their own policy. Basically, the law says that a local authority has to design and hold a allocations policy, has to be transparent, it has to be legal, and it should be, wherever possible, what's called a choice-based letting system. Okay, so choice-based letting system is basically where a person applies to the scheme. They are, if they meet the qualification criteria to join the scheme, their application is then banded into bands A to D, and based on what their housing need is and the priority of their housing need. They will then use that their application, once it's live, to then bid on up to 2 properties each week that are advertised through the housing register. So it's not as the old-fashioned idea is of a waiting list as such, where you register, where you start at the bottom and you over time you work your way to the top, and then you get one offer and that's it. Okay, so somebody can be lowly banded and be on the scheme for many years. Somebody can be highly banded and be on the scheme for a less period of time. Okay, we did have what was called Band E up until December of last year. Now, Band E was where somebody was allowed on the scheme, but they didn't have a housing need. Okay, we got rid of Band E in December when they overhauled the scheme. So now you've got the 4 categories A to D. Okay, now within each band, priority within each band is based on how long a person has been within that band. Okay, so when somebody, let's say, bids on a property on a Monday morning, and they are, say, Band C, and they find that they're first for a property, that bidding process will be open for a week. They may find by the end of that week that they are 34th for that property. Okay, because people have bid and they've had a higher banding and possibly a longer waiting time, and they will have taken priority. Okay, so there's just a bit of detail there. If you want to go and have a look at the Home Point website, then and if you want to direct people of how to make an application, they should go to the website and make the application there, and it will then instruct them once they've made the application of what documentation they need to provide in order to get the assessment done. Can I have the next page, please? Okay, so eligibility for the Home Point scheme is very much the same as it is for homelessness. You have to be eligible for public funds, and then there is a means test for access to the Home Point scheme. Okay, so if you have over the amounts of savings I put there, or over the gross household income, because people think this is quite unfair, but this is the rules. It's the gross, not your net household income. If you have over those levels, then you won't qualify for the scheme. And I have to say, the majority of Home Point appeals I do are about people who have a housing need but can't qualify to get on the scheme because their income is too high. Okay, and I've said there are some exceptions in regards to DA victims where they may be own a property, but they can't sell that property because it's tied up in legal issues because of the DA. Okay, can I have the next one, please? Right, thank you. So there is local connection rules around Home Point as well. They are slightly different to homelessness rules. So you have to have been living in the county for at least 2 years to be able to join the scheme. Or if not for the last 2 years at point of application, for 3 out of the last 5 years at point of application. Okay, you have to be currently employed and 16 hours a week, and or you have to be a Herefordshire care leaver under the age of 21. And local connection rules don't apply to those people fleeing domestic abuse. Okay. Anybody who meets the eligibility and the financial qualification, but does not and has a housing need, but does not have a local connection, will automatically be placed in Band D. So that's the lowest banding on the Home Point scheme. Okay. Thank you. And there I've just listed some of the local connection exemptions. So a lot of it is around members of the armed forces and veterans, and this is to do with the Armed Forces Covenant and the commitment of the local authority. And I've listed them there. Also, victims of domestic abuse don't have to meet the local connection criteria, and care leavers under the age of 25 don't have to meet the local connection criteria. Okay, next slide, please. So on top of your banding, priority banding, there may be circumstances where what's called additional preferences are given. So this is waiting time added on for your banding. Okay, so again, because of the commitment the local authorities given under the Armed Forces Covenant, there is 6 months added additional waiting time added for people who are serving, or families of people who are serving, people who had serious injury as a result of their military service, and I've listed them there for you. Also, those persons who are fleeing homelessness, or become homeless because of domestic abuse, or are threatened with homelessness because of domestic abuse, they can get an additional 6 months waiting time, as Herefordshire care leavers who are moving on from supported accommodation can get an additional 6 months waiting time. Okay, we're almost at the end now. So, as I say, there is where somebody is unhappy with an application, they can request a review or an appeal. To just differentiate between the two, the appeals are for home point assessments, and there are 2 levels of appeal. I deal with the stage 1 level. The manager of the home point team will deal with the stage 2 level, and then the final level, if the applicant is unhappy with that, would be to go to the local government and social care ombudsman. And I've put there the email address for reviews and appeals. And with regards to then a decision made by a homelessness officer, that can be reviewed under Section 202 of the Housing Act, and I'm the reviewing officer for those for reviews. If an applicant is then unhappy with the internal review decision, they have the right to request or challenge the decision through the county court, and that's called a 204 appeal. They would make the application directly to county court, and then our legal council's legal services would become involved. And then there's also the formal complaints procedure, and I'll put the email, a link there for the complaints procedure. And again, that's a 2-stage complaint procedure internally, with the 3rd and final stage being the local government and social care ombudsman. Okay, thank you. Next step. Okay, so I've just put some details here about our opening times and how to contact. So if somebody needs advice or believes themselves to be threatened with homelessness, or is actually homeless, they need to contact our triage. That's the entry point for a homeless application, and that's the opening times there and the telephone number. Okay, we also have a duty desk open at the same times at Blue School House. So there will be an officer there if you need to ask any questions or need to get some advice. And then we have the same and that's the contact details for the home point team and the email details for them. And also for our out of hours emergency team, which kicks in at 4 o'clock every day and then over the weekend. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, and I suppose any questions really?